Good afternoon, everybody. It is my honor as Mayor of the City of Hartford to welcome, first of all, Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, Director Botticelli, as well as the Director of the White House Office of Social Innovation, David Wilkinson. Happens to be a law school classmate of mine, so it's fun to welcome him back to Hartford. And it is always an honor to join our Governor, Governor Malloy, as well as Commissioner Katz and our Senator, Senator Blumenthal. This is an important event to hold here in our historic old State House to kick off the beginning of a new form of social investment. This new model of pay-for-performance, social impact bonds, gives us the ability to bring resources to the table, private and public resources to the table, in a way that we know will be used in the most effective way, will be measured, that programs will be held accountable, and we'll know at the end whether our dollars were well spent. It's critically important in this time when, as our governor has said many times, we're facing a new reality of budget restrictions, but the same, if not growing, challenges in our communities and the need to invest even more. So this program, Family-Based Recovery, focused on ensuring that we're able to do the kind of intervention that protects children's welfare, that addresses those parents who may be struggling with substance use, and to get there through the right kind of constant, consistent interventions to make sure that we are protecting kids at the most critical stage and doing it in an innovative way. It's my honor to welcome you all here, and it is now my honor to turn it over to Director Botticelli. Director Botticelli, welcome and thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Mayor Bronin, for that introduction and for welcoming us to your city. I also like to thank Governor Malloy for being here today, and Senator Blumenthal. I was just recalling with the senator, I think we were last here with him in Connecticut a number of years ago to talk about this opioid work and the work that we're doing with community health centers. Commissioner Katz and Director Wilkinson, thank you for joining for today's announcement. And it's really no secret that we're facing an opioid epidemic across this country. More Americans now die every year from drug overdoses than they do in motor vehicle crashes. More than 47,000 in 2014 alone, with opioids involved with more than 28,000 of those deaths. 525 of those opioid-related deaths happened right here in Connecticut. The good news is that Connecticut is a leader on drug disposal, syringe services, expanding services to the life-saving opioid overdose reversal drug naloxone, and prescription drug monitoring. And these are all making a real difference in people's lives. And the New England High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, funded by our office, is coordinating efforts to disrupt drug trafficking networks in the state. This collaboration between federal, state, local, and private sector leaders demonstrate the federal government's strong commitment to addressing the heroin and prescription opioid epidemic as both a public health and public safety issue. We're making progress, but we still know we have a very, very long way to go, and that's what makes today so important. We're here to talk about innovative solutions to encourage businesses and the community to invest in evidence-based proposals to expand treatment. One of these ideas is the Connecticut Family Stability Pay for Success Project, an exciting program with real potential to help at-risk families. And the governor and others will talk in greater detail about the program. But before I do, I really want to stress that it's going to take everybody working together to stop this crisis. President Obama has made clear that addressing this opioid epidemic is a priority for his administration. And that's reflected in the work he's done throughout his presidency and in the new budget he released last Tuesday, which includes $1.1 billion in new funding for treatment to help people with substance use disorders access treatment, complete treatment, and sustain long-term recovery. So it's really a pleasure to be here today, and I'd like to turn it over to Governor Malloy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Director. We have a senator, a mayor, 2 directors, numerous commissioners and ex-commissioners in the room, so it's great to be with everyone. I certainly want to single out, as opposed to all the other commissioners who are here, Commissioner Katz for the great work that she and the organization that she has put together are doing. So I want to thank you all for being here. Luke, it's great to be with you, and thank you for your introduction today. As a resident of Hartford, I'm glad to call you my mayor. So President Obama has set a pretty clear agenda for us and has set the tone of government. We need to be smart, we need to be innovative, and we need to be effective. He's made it clear and he's led that way. And so I am very proud that his administration has taken notice of what we are doing in our state on a wide variety of initiatives. That includes the heroin or opioid abuse initiatives that we've undertaken. It certainly includes our desire to end homelessness amongst veterans as an initiative, our Second Chance initiative. Many of these things are woven together, and our initiatives are supportive of these things across departmental lines. That's why we have a plethora of commissioners here today. Today is about launching a new approach and starting a new way to fund important programs here in Connecticut. Since I took office, we have seen a 16.5% reduction in the number of children in state care and a more than 60% reduction of children in group care. Those are drops to be proud of. When it comes to DCF, we believe in keeping families together, and this announcement is about our next step to do just that. Today we're announcing a first-of-its-kind contract in Connecticut to use social impact bonds, sometimes called pay-for-success financing, to significantly expand proven, effective substance abuse treatment services for families. And it is important. Called the Connecticut Family Stability Pay-for-Success Project, we will be utilizing innovative public-private partnerships to deliver better outcomes for children in DCF care. The Pay for Success project will support new treatment teams delivering support to families in need, ones with a history of substance abuse. Each treatment team, comprised of 2 clinicians and 1 family support worker, will visit a client's home several times per week to promote positive parent-child interactions, increase parental awareness, and help parents on their path to substance abuse recovery. Connecticut currently runs a similar initiative for families with children to age 3. Now, with a new infusion of dollars and new financing mechanism, the program will be scaled up to serve households with children aged 6 years and younger, and allow us to serve approximately 500 new families throughout Connecticut. New recovery teams will help us reach new areas including Waterbury, Danbury, Torrington, Norwich, and Middletown, and New Haven. They'll help with substance use recovery and help parents better care for their children. With the new partners and this new innovative financing system that combines nonprofit expertise, private funding, and rigorous evaluations, we are tackling critical issues like substance use while helping families remain together. This promises to make a huge difference in the lives of hundreds of Connecticut families and their children. Through the outstanding leadership by Commissioner of DCF, Joette Katz, the hard work of her staff, and the assistance of social financing, and the talented people from the Harvard Kennedy School Social Impact Bond Lab, we are now ready to apply this innovation in government here in Connecticut, and specifically to child welfare services in our state. So I would like to thank the Director once again for being with us and spending a fair amount of time today, I might add. This is not a touch and go. We're going to be at this for a while. And I'd like to turn it over to Senator Blumenthal as our next speaker. The Senator has a long history here in Connecticut of great leadership in the legislature, in his role as Attorney General, and now certainly in his role as the senior Senator from the state of Connecticut. I'll give you Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks to the governor for his leadership. He has been extraordinarily steadfast in his battle on behalf of the state against opioid and heroin addiction. And I want to welcome Michael Botticelli, who visited Connecticut before, has really been a visionary and courageous leader in this area. I also want to thank the mayor for hitting the ground running on this issue. He has made it a challenge for the city of Hartford, as it should be. All of you who are here, some of you have been at the roundtables that I've been organizing around the state and contributed immensely to my understanding of this issue. This new initiative is a marker, a down payment, not a solution. It sends a message that Connecticut's going to be at the forefront of the battle against opioid and heroin addiction. And that battle is still to be fought. We gather in a historic place. I'm always awed when I enter this chamber, literally where democracy was born. I doubt that the founders could have foreseen this public health emergency. The stark fact, and if you remember nothing else that I say, is that 129 people will die today in the United States of America as a result of fatal overdoses. Think of it for a moment. The greatest country in the history of the world, the strongest democracy, and 129 people will die as a result of overdoses of heroin and other opioids. That is a searing indictment of our nation. And we should regard this public health emergency much as we would a physical disaster, whether a hurricane or tornado or other kind of physical disaster. Now, my background is in law enforcement. I'm honored that one of my successors, Deirdre Daley, the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut, is here today. And law enforcement has united strongly and steadfastly to stop the illicit traffic and dealing in drugs. But we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. We're not going to jail our way out of the heroin epidemic in this country. It has to be a combined effort, a community effort that brings together law enforcement, treatment professionals, community leaders who will take a united stand and meet this crisis with more than just words. I am a strong supporter of the $1.1 billion that the president has proposed in his budget. But it's a budget. It's a proposal. It's not money in hand. We need an emergency supplemental now. $600 million that I am co-sponsoring. I'm asking the Appropriations Committee to approve it right away, just as they would an emergency appropriation for a storm, a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake in this country, because this disaster has to be met with that kind of urgency and energy. And so I welcome this approach. I think it is tremendously important, but we need to address this issue with the passion that is necessary to really overcome and combat a scourge that affects every community in the state of Connecticut and our country. Anybody who thinks her child, her home, his community is immune, you're kidding yourself. This scourge and epidemic will affect anyone and everyone, because the dirty little secret is it can begin with painkillers prescribed by a physician or taken from the medicine cabinet by somebody who has opioids, Percocet, Vicodin, any of the enormously powerful painkillers. That's the potential gateway to heroin addiction. That's the work that we have ahead of us, and we need to be united in endeavoring to meet this challenge. And I'm very proud to introduce our next speaker, David Wilkinson, who is the director of the White House Office of Social Innovation and represents a president who has really helped to lead the nation on this issue. David.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Thank you for those compelling words, and thank you for being such a great partner to the President and to the White House, and thank you for being a leader on this incredibly important issue. I also want to thank Mayor Bronin for welcoming us and hosting us. When Mayor Bronin was my law school classmate, he was always the first to host a get-together. So I see that he is just as gracious a host as mayor here in Hartford. We're very excited about his new role as the governor's mayor. And thank you also, Governor Malloy, for your leadership, and thank you in particular to your Department of Children and Families and Joette Katz, who you'll hear from soon about this project. And for Connecticut's leadership in addressing this critical issue, and that's really helping to stabilize families. So why did the President send so many of us today to join you for this event? We've got the President's director of the nation's response to substance use disorders. We would have had the senior administration official overseeing the child welfare system. Unfortunately, his attendance was a casualty of our air traffic system in a nor'easter, 3 canceled flights. So I'm here to bring greetings also of our Commissioner of the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families, Commissioner Rafael Lopez, who wishes us well and is very enthusiastic about this project. And me, I'm the director of the Office of Social Innovation, as the Senator said. This project is important, and we're here because it addresses several priorities across the substance abuse issue, across child welfare, and bringing the tools of social innovation. You heard Director Botticelli speak of the fact that this is a top presidential priority, taking on substance use. Commissioner Lopez, if he was here, would have talked about how substance use is the biggest driver of children into the foster care and child welfare systems. And you found a way in Connecticut to take on that challenge using Pay for Success through cross-sector solutions, as Senator Blumenthal referred to. So Pay for Success is the centerpiece of the President's social innovation agenda. Why is Pay for Success a priority for the President? Well, despite the progress we've made over this administration, despite record employment growth, despite high school graduation rates reaching record levels, despite the lowest rate of uninsured in the history of our country, and despite so much other progress, we know that not everyone has been lifted up at the same rate by this progress. And there's no higher priority for the President than addressing and continuing to address this unmet need. And of course, social services are at the center of that priority set. And our options are simple. There's 2 ways that we can enhance impact and outcomes through social sector. 1, we can spend more. Now, the challenge is that we know at the state level and at the local level and at the federal level, budgets are stretched, and we aren't incredibly likely to substantially grow social spending in the near term. The second option is to spend smarter. And on that front, there's considerably more promise. We know that there are solutions that are outperforming business as usual across issue areas. And one of them, notably, has really been surfaced here in Connecticut, family-based recovery. Now, here is a solution, like many others that are, through rigorous evaluation, proving that they're consistently getting better results. So what is family-based recovery doing? I'm sure Commissioner Katz will share more, but families who receive this intervention are 40% less likely to have a child removed from the home. And the solution cuts re-referrals to the child welfare system in half. So that's the type of solution we're talking about when we say we can spend smarter. We know there are interventions that are achieving 30, 50, 70% better results than business as usual. They are preventive solutions. They get better outcomes for families, for communities, and they save money. So if we're going to move the needle on the intractable challenges that are facing our society, in the near term, it may be less likely to do so by substantially increasing social services spending, but it's absolutely within our grasp to do so by spending the resources we have smarter. Now, the challenge is that too often these tremendous solutions like family-based recovery, they stay on the shelf. We know they're working better, we know they're getting better results, but we don't take them down off the shelf enough. They are not deployed widely enough, and therefore people don't receive the benefits. That happens for a couple of reasons. One is that budgets are stretched. It's hard to invest in the preventive solutions, even if we know they will save us resources down the line. And we also know there can be resistance to change from the status quo. And so that's where Pay for Success comes in. Pay for Success overcomes barriers by allowing government to pay only for what works. So Pay for Success is simple. Government sets a goal for outcomes. Nonprofit service providers agree to pursue that goal, and government only pays if the target outcomes are met. That overcomes barriers because we're implementing preventive solutions that can often save us resources, keep us from hitting the deeper and more expensive parts of the social safety net. And because government only pays for what works, it means taxpayers aren't on the hook if a particular intervention doesn't work in a particular occasion. So it helps us take these solutions that work best down off the shelf and deploy them to folks in need. So here, Connecticut has set a goal of reducing substance use and reducing referral to the child welfare system, keeping families together. Nonprofit service providers, the Yale Child Health Center, is deploying this evidence-based solution, family-based recovery, to achieve those goals. And the state of Connecticut will pay only when the program lowers the rate of substance use among parents and increases family stability. In other words, Connecticut is using Pay for Success to scale a proven program, get better results, and only pay if the results are achieved. That's a win for taxpayers. That's a win for families and children in Connecticut, and it's also a win for our country. That's because through this project, Connecticut is showing the country that we can scale up what works to tackle substance use and strengthen families through Pay for Success. You are showing here in Connecticut, you're showing governors, you're showing mayors, nonprofits, and philanthropies, impact investors, a new model that they can follow. And we know that Governor Malloy is not done yet. The state is pursuing additional Pay for Success projects, firmly establishing Connecticut as a national leader in social innovation. So we're grateful to be here to, in particular, recognize this tremendous new intervention in this Pay for Success project that the Department of Children and Families is kicking off. And I have the pleasure of introducing one of Governor Malloy's social innovators, Joette Katz. And I just have to say, I really feel like we are coming full circle because Commissioner Katz first was able to come to the White House and bring 5 children from her child welfare system down to the White House for a showing of the new version of the film Annie. And we had Jamie Foxx there, and we had Cameron Diaz and the whole cast, and the Vice President spoke at length, and one of our feature announcements was the fact that Connecticut was pursuing this Pay for Success project, and Connecticut has come through, and here we are today celebrating the launch of this terrific project. So without further ado, Commissioner Katz.
It's now good afternoon. So some of what I'm going to say, it will sound repetitive, but I think it's really important because it will highlight not just what we're doing, but hopefully you'll understand why we're doing it. So first of all, let me thank Governor Malloy, who is for 5 years has really allowed me great reign. And I thank him so much for the faith and the confidence that he has placed in me. Thank you, Governor. And to the hardworking men and women at the department. Also, obviously, thank you so much to all of our friends from Washington, Director Botticelli and Wilkinson, and Commissioner Lopez, who couldn't be here, but Melinda Baldwin is here. Thank you so much for coming. And because they really understand the importance of this cutting-edge strategy that we are announcing today. So what is the strategy really based on? What's at its foundation? Three important facts that face us in Connecticut, but also really face us nationally, and I really do hope other states look to us as a model when we launch. So the first thing is that children are best off if they can live safely at home with their parents and with their families. That's sort of, you hear that, and hopefully your first reaction is, duh. So there you have it. The second is something that is tragic, but again, not unique to Connecticut, and that is half the children who cannot stay safely at home come from homes impacted by substance abuse. That's a huge number. I have 4,000 children for whom I am the statutory parent or custodian. So do the math. Half of them could not live safely at home because of substance use issues in their families. And the third is that state governments are increasingly challenged to fund the services that could otherwise keep these children safely at home with their parents. So the Family Stability Pay for Success project that you've heard about this morning is the first in the nation approach to addressing all three of these facts. And it's notable that both the design and financing of the program reflect the recognition that government can't do everything. And it certainly can't do it alone. Social impact bonds, also otherwise called Pay for Success financing, as you heard, uses private resources to fund proven, effective, and promising services. And if an independent evaluation shows that the services achieve the predetermined positive outcomes, then and only then does the government repay the investors. So this responds to a critical service need that we've identified, but it also supports government's accountability and its responsible use of public resources. With the help of Harvard Kennedy School of Government and Social Finance, specifically Jeff Liebman, Gloria Gong, and Ryan Gillette, we announced a partnership with Social Finance, a third-party intermediary, and they are here today. Thank you so much. And this partnership will provide $12.5 million from private funders to purchase intensive in-home substance abuse treatment for parents otherwise at risk of losing their children. The treatment model was selected, this has been going on for a number of years, and the treatment model was selected following an exhaustive review of more than 70 substance use recovery interventions nationwide, and it is very well conceived. The program model is not new in Connecticut. It began in the year 2007 when the department partnered with Yale and Johns Hopkins University to address parental substance use disorders. The program selected has been provided by the Yale Child Study Center. Thank you. Thank you for being here, our partners. And the program provides services to parents whose substance use disorders are serious enough that their children could otherwise be removed. As you heard the governor say, families work with a team of 2 clinicians and a family support worker coming to their home for up to 18 months. This is not a quick fix, and it's not a problem that resolves quickly either. A critical element of the program is that it addresses more than the negative impact of substance abuse, more than the obvious negative impact. It also provides therapy specifically to enhance the parent-child bond, and that, of course, then strengthens the motivation for parents to complete their treatment and successfully achieve recovery, which is really what we're looking for. Studies demonstrate that the bonding, the satisfaction, and richness of parenting are pathways to recovery for many, many parents. A recent study conducted by the team from Yale and the department found that parents receiving family-based recovery have reduced depression, reduced stress, reduced substance use, have increased bonding with their children, and high rates of children remaining with their parents upon completion of the treatment. So we know this model works. And as you heard the governor say, at present, only families with children 0 to 3 have been served. But because of this new infusion of resources, we are going to be able to expand the program to include families with children up to the age of 6. And over the next 4 years, we expect 500 new families to be served. As a result, the trend of reducing the number of children in care, 16.5% to date since the governor took office, is one we expect to continue. So in closing, this is a very exciting moment for us in Connecticut. We are the first state in the nation to use social impact bonds to promote family stability by supporting parents recovering from substance use disorders. But the greatest satisfaction will be that more children will remain safely at home with their parents. And really nothing can be better. So thank you to everyone on the podium with me, and thank you all for being here today.
So we have another program that starts relatively soon, but we'll take a couple of questions on point if there are any.
Can you give us a little better explanation of social impact bonds? This is donated money from philanthropists, I presume. And so what happens? If they're success, they get paid back? How does that work?
That's a great question. It is typically impact investors.
What does that mean?
So that is philanthropic investors. You may have heard of double bottom line investors. Right. So they're looking for a modest financial return, but their priority is social impact. So essentially the way it works is a social service provider doesn't typically have the resources to deliver an intervention and wait for success to be proved before it gets paid. That's where an impact investor steps in. They make a bet that the intervention will work. Right. They provide the upfront financing. If it does work, they get paid back. Typical rates of return are sort of the low impact levels. 3 to 5% is what we typically see in most pay for success projects. So it really is driven by a desire to achieve better social impact.
And these are large philanthropic organizations?
It is philanthropy and other mission investors, including individuals who have a philanthropic objective, including banks, private banks, as well as philanthropies who do about $700 million in investing currently in the United States.
What's the incentive? I mean, you get back a small return. Wouldn't it be easier to just give the money and take a tax write-off?
Well, there's two goals here. One is that philanthropy funds tremendous programs all around their country, and their exit strategy, if you will, is to see that these programs get into the government bloodstream, that they can scale through government. But it's actually quite hard to take something new and innovative and typically small that philanthropy can fund and insert it into larger state or city programming. This is a way of doing that, and it's a way to enable government to pay for positive social outcomes. Typically, philanthropy is used to a 100% loss. That's what a grant is. In this case, philanthropy makes an investment, and if it works, they'll get their capital back so that they can make further grants or other impact investment. So it amplifies impact.
Who's making the investment in this program, and how much are they investing?
I believe that that this project, we're announcing today that the state of Connecticut is launching an initiative and it is signing a contract, but that the capital is to be raised following the launch of this contract.
Well,
but I imagine it's going to be...
Does someone up there know how much it's going to cost?
It's $12.5 million or so in investing. Yep, 12.5.
Locally, or just these are national entities?
We'll be calling upon a pool of dollars that is available, some in state, some out of state. So it's it's a combination, and the state is sticking our necks out a little bit on this as well. But that's why I think the Commissioner's comments about the selection of the specific program, which we know already works on a limited basis, that we've been able to apply with the dollars that were available, by scaling this up substantially to include families up to the age with children up to the age of 6, and assuming that we serve another 500 families, and the Commissioner didn't do the math on that, but this particular model has a 40% better outcome than other models that simply sending a person for treatment or getting a person in a 12-step program. This is 40% stronger or better results. And so when she was referencing specifically the impact on the number of children that might be in our care, at great cost, it has a substantial payback.
Where does the principal and interest come from when the investors are paid back?
You know, we'll have somebody talk to you specifically about it and walk you through it. I know the program pretty well, but I don't know. I think you keep asking, in essence, where specifically the dollars are coming from, and they are coming from a pool.
Well, I understand.
But I'll get somebody with you.
Philanthropic investment, but you're saying that they get paid back. If
Well,
they're successful.
sure. I mean, this is not that hard. Foundations have amounts of money. And typically, foundations will make a grant to an entity. They write out a check, and the dollar is forever gone. So it's a one-timer. What this is about in philanthropy and social investing is someone having the expectation that they're going to recover that money so that they can invest it yet again.
I understand that,
Okay.
but
Now,
where does it come
hold on a
from when
second.
you pay them
No,
back?
hang on a second. So they get paid back, in essence, by our return of dollars because we're going to have X number of fewer children in our care on a long-term basis. So what we're linking, in some senses, not for the first time overall, but on a much broader basis, is we're linking outcome with the ability to recover, as opposed to, let's think of it. You go to a hospital, and you have an operation and you die. Your state still pays for it, but the outcome wasn't very good. We're going to pay for good outcomes, and that's what we're doing. And so those are state dollars in essence, but they're based on the amounts of money being saved because we funded a broader, better intervention system.
Determine if the program works to the success level that merits its aid.
We would like this program to, on a broader basis, including the additional 500 families or so, to produce the same results that it has already produced, and that is a 40% better return. Now, a repayment is not solely based on that, but that's an expectation that by expanding this program numerically, we should have similar results.
But is the state making that judgment as to whether it's successful or not, or who's making that judgment?
You want to talk to that? Yeah.
So if I can go back for a moment, you know, as the governor indicated, I mean, these are children, frankly, that we would otherwise be paying for in foster care or in congregate placements at far, far greater expense. When you think about removing 2, 3, and 4 children from a home and maintaining them safely and appropriately over an 18-year period, do the math. And so what we're doing is we're keeping those children from ever having to come into care in the first place. And when I mentioned earlier that this has been a long time in the making, we identified this opportunity and worked with a lot of partners and began the evaluation with an eye towards, obviously, hopefully succeeding, and also identifying some funds that we were going to be able to allocate towards this end. And as we've moved away from congregate placements, we've reduced, as you heard the governor say, our congregate placements by 65%, as we've returned all of our children but 10, and I could give you their social security numbers from out-of-state facilities. We've been able to, and maintain some flexibility around those dollars, we've been able to maintain what we think we're going to need to pay back the funders if successful. And obviously, we hope this is successful.
Has the success rate among the 250 families that have been helped by Yale so far been 40%?
I'm sorry?
Has the success rate among the 250 families helped so far by
Yes.
the Yale group been about 40%?
Yes, otherwise they wouldn't be selected and we wouldn't be doing this, most definitely.
And with that, we got to move into the other room. So we're going to call it quits, but most of you are going to be around longer. You'll get another chance yet. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we have a wonderful opportunity to be visited by Director Michael Botticelli from the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. As Director of the as Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, I can say with certainty, during this unprecedented challenge with addiction, that we are glad to have Director Botticelli here with us today, so welcome. Governor Malloy, thank you for your presence here today and for your leadership in this challenging health crisis. Together with other officials here today, Senator Blumenthal, Congressman Larson, Attorney Deirdre Daley, representatives from Connecticut Legislature, Hartford Mayor Luke Bronin, and many others, We will continue to respond to this challenge in ways that move our communities forward from addiction to recovery. I thank all of you here today who are individuals in recovery for your strength, resolve, courage, and commitment. Not only do you teach us about recovery, but you demonstrate that recovery is real and offer us examples of hope. So thank you. We could go over dozens and dozens of statistics demonstrating the scope of the current heroin prescription drug crisis. But I think most of us here understand that this is a crisis. Nationally, heroin has more than doubled among young adults aged 18 to 25 years old in the past decade. And 45% of individuals who use heroin were also addicted to opioid prescription painkillers. In 2013 in the United States, an estimated 517,000 persons reported past year heroin abuse or dependence, a nearly 150% increase since 2007. We are not immune here in Connecticut in the Northeast, as the Northeast has been one of the hardest hit regions in the country. Our state has seen a steady increase in admissions for substance use, and heroin has now replaced alcohol as a primary drug of choice in our substance abuse treatment systems. The number of opioid-related deaths continues to grow, and family members are losing loved ones. We are thankful to Governor Malloy for his leadership in passing legislation to address this health crisis. For several years now, legislation related to the opioid crisis has been proposed and subsequently passed. The latest bill signed into law this past July expands the use of prescription monitoring program, increases education available to healthcare professionals, and improves the accessibility of overdose reversing drug Narcan. The governor has promoted treating addiction as an illness and not as a crime, addressing it as a public health crisis that it is. Under the 2015 legislation, in cases of overdose, Narcan is now more widely available, allowing pharmacists to provide it to friends and family members who are struggling with addiction, as well as first responders and to treatment and recovery programs across the state. The Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services is responsible for addiction prevention, treatment, and recovery. We offer a broad spectrum of detox, residential, and outpatient services, as well as medication and recovery, medication-assisted treatment, and recovery supports, including housing, employment, and peer support services, and telephone supports as well. In Connecticut, in the most recent 12-month period, we served over 60,000 individuals in addiction treatment and recovery services, and nearly 11,000 of those individuals in our detox treatment programs, and half of these individuals for heroin or prescription drug. Yet while addiction is real, recovery is also very real, and the number of recovering individuals consistently has risen over the years. Research demonstrates soundly that medication-assisted treatment, along with counseling and other recovery peer supports, offers persons addicted to opiates the best chances to recover. In Connecticut, we have 25 methadone clinics across our state, and the number of recovering individuals served by those clinics has risen significantly. In the most recent 12-month period, our Connecticut treatment system has served over 19,000 individuals in medication-assisted treatment, and a number of these individuals have been treated with buprenorphine as well. While we have engaged tens of thousands of individuals with addiction in treatment successfully in Connecticut, we know that there's more that we can do and that we can always do better. DEMAS, along with others from state and federal government, are committed to pulling out all stops to engage persons in long-term recovery and to educate individuals and communities about opioid treatment addiction. In closing, I'd like to reiterate that while the challenges before us are daunting, there are many examples of hope and that recovery is very real. And conversations and spaces like this are an important part of the solution. So I so appreciate the fact that everybody's here and that you all are engaging in this conversation with us, because we believe this is a really important part of addressing this challenge as well. So thank you. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to this discussion. Now, I have the distinct honor of introducing Mayor Luke Bronin next. Mayor Bronin has had an opportunity to serve in numerous senior positions in federal and state government. In 2013, he was appointed by Connecticut Governor Daniel Malloy to serve as general counsel. In this position, as the governor's chief lawyer, he partnered with legislators and state agency officials to advance the governor's agenda. Prior to his role in Governor Malloy's office, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing of the Financial Crimes of the U.S. Department of Treasury in Washington, D.C. His bio goes on and on. It is really quite impressive, but I'll just end and say he earned his BA and JD from Yale University, and he was also a Rhodes Scholar. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mayor Bronin. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. It was kind but unnecessary. It is heartening to see the room packed. Packed with so many people who I suspect by being here already know how grave the crisis is, and the fact that the opioid epidemic cuts across all lines, race, ethnicity, gender, rural, urban, suburban, state, federal, local. There is not a community in the country that's not affected, and we here in Hartford are affected in devastating ways. But it's our shared problem. As the Commissioner just said, and as there are so many people have been talking about lately, the toll can be measured in deaths, in overdoses, and we should be grateful to be in a state that is taking aggressive steps to make sure that Narcan is available to ensure that we can stop those unnecessary deaths. But the toll of the epidemic is not just measured in death. We just came from a press conference upstairs along with the White House Director of Office of National Drug Control Policy and the White House Director of Social Innovation, talking about a new intervention, using social impact bonds to fund a program that will allow for intervention with families of children who've been involved with the DCF system, Department of Children and Families. And Commissioner Katz was there, used a statistic that was really maybe not surprising, but no less painful to hear, that 1 of every 2 children who ends up having to be removed from their families is from a family where there is a substance use problem. And that toll is just as severe and just as problematic as the deaths that we see in the headlines of our newspapers. This is an epidemic that, as the Commissioner said, has to be treated like a public health problem. It is tremendous, and I think should give us a lot of cause for optimism that we have here a lot of representatives from law enforcement, our U.S. Attorney, our Commissioner of the Department of Corrections, as I said, the Office of National Drug Control Policy, but that we also have our public health experts, and that we also have our social welfare agencies. This has to be done in partnership. We have to get rid of those lines between those different departments and those different approaches. We're not going to solve this problem just from one angle. And so I know I saw Senator Giarratana, who is the co-chair of the Public Health Committee in the state of Connecticut, along with Hartford's representative Matt Ritter. And I know they are working hard on a range of bills this session that will hopefully continue to put Connecticut at the forefront of creatively, aggressively addressing the opioid epidemic, not just the overdose, but the underlying epidemic that has destroyed far too many families and far too many communities. I've already spoken longer than I meant to. I'm grateful to everybody who is working on this issue, and thrilled to see such a packed room. And now it is my honor to introduce a woman who needs no introduction at all, who is a relentless fighter for Connecticut and for our country, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor. And I just would say that you are absolutely right. The size of the crowd here today is just the tip of the iceberg of the public health crisis that we are facing today. And I am delighted to have been asked to, invited to come here to discuss what is a troubling rise in opioid abuse in our state and across this country. Honored to be with the Commissioner and the Mayor, U.S. Attorney Daley, and pleased to join my colleagues. And I guess I kick to my dear colleague, the Attorney, U.S. Attorney Daley, but I want to acknowledge my colleague John Larson, my colleague Joe Courtney, who isn't here, but we have worked together as a House delegation in putting forth legislation to try to address this issue. I want to say a thank you to the Governor for bringing such attention to this issue. We are all thankful for the doctors, the public health advocates, the state and the federal leaders on the panel today. They are going to share their perspectives on the scope of the opioid problem and what we can do to combat it. And I met a young woman who was going to speak about her own experience. And she talked about how nervous she was in speaking before you today. And I told her, don't be nervous. Tell your story. Tell your story. Because that's what people here have to hear. We are all delighted to welcome the Office of National Drug Policy Director Michael Botticelli to Connecticut. I was glad to hear him speak this morning about the federal government proposals that are going to help us with this issue. We were in North Haven at the Connecticut Medical Society listening to the great work that people in our community are doing already, and we should be so proud of helping to lead the way. We were also at the Connecticut Correctional Center this morning. You want to talk about a powerful experience and a poignant experience? To see these young men lined up as they go to the window, put their ID up against it, and get dispensed methadone with a shot of orange juice afterward because the taste is terrible, so that they can get themselves back on track. And those that we talk to talk not only about the health aspects of what they need, but they also talked about jobs. They talked about housing. And if we're going to address this issue, it is about their health, it is about housing, it is about jobs, it is about the social services that surround this effort. Over 47,000 drug overdose deaths in 2014. Heroin was a factor in over 10,000. And opioids were involved in 20,808. Deaths are likely undercounted. Connecticut loses hundreds of citizens every year to overdoses, 357 in 2012, 582 in 2013, 623 in 2014, and 723 people in 2015. According to the Chief Medical Examiner of Connecticut, last year, the heroin overdose death rate was 3 times higher than it was in 2012. Thousands of people are addicted or are in recovery. I have the honor of serving as a senior Democrat on the Labor, Health, and Education Appropriation Subcommittee in the House of Representatives. This is the committee through which the funding passes for the Department of Health and Human Services to support substance abuse efforts. Proud that we have helped to secure over $38 million increase in the Substance Abuse and Treatment Block Grant Program for the SAMHSA program that happened in 2016. And I will tell you, we need advocates for the SAMHSA program. We need you to be out there, not that when it comes in the budget, that it's not flatlined, but that it is increased. If we're serious about mental health services, that we will increase the dollars for mental health services in this country. Many families are without health insurance or not the kind of insurance that they need. And that's an issue that we have to face. We dealt with $50 million increase for the Center for Disease Control for the Prevention and Drug Overdose Prevention Program. This is a program that seeks to provide states with the resources they need to prevent prescription opioid overdoses by reducing the inappropriate prescribing practices that fuel this epidemic. With that increased funding, the CDC should now be able to expand that program to the state of Connecticut this year. 2017 budget, the President has proposed $1 billion in mandatory funding to address the opioid crisis. He asked for $920 million to expand access to medicated assisted treatment that we've been talking about, $50 million for the National Health Service Corps. This morning in the meeting with the Connecticut Medical Society, Dr. Krause, who you will get a chance to hear from later, talked about what the use of that money is for, having it be directed where it needs to go. That's where we have to hear from the experts on this effort. I'm crafting a bill that would provide $1 billion a year toward behavioral health and substance abuse to support community clinics, expand access to treatment for individuals with mental health issues and a long history of substance abuse. We've also subjected a Public Health Emergency Preparedness Act. That's $5 billion for an emergency fund. Rather than having to appropriate money every single year, let's do what we do for disaster relief in this country. Let us put aside $5 billion, and when an issue like this comes up, we have ready access to the dollars that are out there. Access to Naloxone, folks have talked about that. We are greatly supportive of this effort. I know there are some pharmacists, young pharmacists here today. What we need to do is to make sure that our pharmacists have the training that they don't have to pay for and can be helpful in the process of dispensing in this effort. It's up to all of us. It's up to all of us to engage in this process and, above all, to reduce the stigma that surrounds substance abuse. We can't afford to wait any longer. And my view is always, when the opportunity arises, and it has arisen, and the door is open, let us walk through in a very fulsome way and make sure that we try to address this issue in the way that we can. And I thank you very, very much, and it's a great pleasure to introduce our U.S. Attorney, Ms. Dalick. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you and welcome, and thank you all for being here. As federal prosecutors in this state, we recognize that in addition to traditional law enforcement responsibilities, we must also dedicate ourselves to outreach. That means reentry, that means addressing recidivism, that means crime prevention, and that means efforts to prevent, treat, and provide recovery to addiction. Former Attorney General Eric Holder said federal prosecutors can't just be case processors. They must be community problem solvers. We in Connecticut have taken that message to heart. Heroin deaths occur in all corners of Connecticut. As you know, from our smallest towns to our largest cities, victims are men and women as young teenagers and as old as people in their 70s. We are all vulnerable. Opiate abuse knows no boundaries. It occurs in all neighborhoods, those underprivileged and those privileged. Sadly, too many of us know people who've died from opiate abuse. The statistics are deeply disturbing. Every day over 100 people die from an overdose. 1/2 of them die from an opiate overdose, most from heroin, but also from the synthetic opiate fentanyl, or sometimes from prescription pain medications. 4 out of 5 new heroin users were addicted to pain medication before they switched to heroin. Some initially became addicted because they were using and prescribed pain medication. Too often, young people become addicted because they experiment with what they find in the medicine cabinets of their parents. And too many of these people switch to heroin. They switch because they can't afford the pills. An OxyContin pill costs $30. A bag of heroin can be as cheap as $3. Further, there is a 50% increase in heroin use over the country. And here in Connecticut, in the last 4 years, the number of deaths from opioids has far more than doubled, from 195 deaths in 2012 to 444 last year. Of those 2015 opioid deaths, 415 were heroin related. and in 107, fentanyl was involved. Most of this heroin comes from Mexico, the Sinaloa cartel, which has distribution networks in all our major cities. The startling increase here is the result of a perfect storm: the increased distribution of both higher purity levels of heroin and fentanyl. In some cases, dealers are peddling straight fentanyl, which can be 50 times more potent than heroin. Most users are completely unaware of what they're ingesting. As you well know, this is not just about statistics. The individual tragedies literally break our hearts. A 14-year-old girl in East Windsor overdosed when some friends of hers gave her a bag of straight fentanyl. A 26-year-old man who was down in Florida in an in-house treatment place doing very well. He'd been clean for 6 months and he'd hoped to become an abuse counselor. He came back for a dental procedure. The day before he was flying back to Florida, he was suffering from the pain of the procedure, reached out to his old heroin dealer who gave him 2 bags. He ingested the 2 bags and immediately collapsed. 3 hours later, his devastated parents found him alone. He had died in his childhood bedroom. Just this Christmas break in Weston, Connecticut, a boy came home from college and overdosed on oxycodone, and he's now in a coma. And within the last 3 months alone, in a single town in Connecticut, 2 young men died. They were both sons of retired police officers from heroin overdoses. Awareness is so important, and that is why I'm spending time talking about the problem. But I want to close on a more positive note. I want to tell you what federal law enforcement is doing to help stem the tide of opiate abuse. First, we are working very closely with our partners in DEA, the Connecticut State Police, and local police departments to respond to these overdoses and to identify who is the source of this particularly lethal heroin. It is our top priority to make these identifications, to get that heroin off the street and out of the hands of vulnerable users. Second, all DEA agents and task force officers who work with DEA, as well as all Connecticut State Police troopers, are equipped with naloxone. This is as you know, this is an overdose antidote. And in the last year alone, the Connecticut State Police has saved 60 lives by using this antidote. Third, our anti-violence initiative, Project Longevity, is rooted in New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport. It is funded by the state, and we work closely with the police departments in each of those cities. The program offers social services, including treatment for addiction, to those most at risk in these cities of committing violence or being vulnerable to violence. And many of these participants are taking advantage of the services that we are offering. Fourth, Support Court started in federal court in Connecticut 5 years ago. 3 federal judges meet every week for several hours with a group of recovering addicts in Support Court. They're joined by probation officers, a public defender, and a federal prosecutor. The sole goal of these meetings is to provide support for those defendants who are struggling to overcome their addictions. To date, 65 of the 158 participants have graduated, and their stories of survival give us hope. They say that Support Court was the wake-up call that saved their lives. The other day, I met a graduate. She came to my office, 50-year-old woman. She'd been an addict for 35 years. but now she'd been clean for 3 years. She works in quite a famous grocery store in Connecticut that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and goes around to prisons throughout the Northeast telling her story. Each of these initiatives reflect our deep dedication to public safety and to public health. Our commitment is to preventing crime, reducing recidivism, and supporting long-term recovery. Thank you for your time, your interest, and your commitment to this issue. It is now my honor to introduce Congressman Larson.
Thank you, Attorney Daly. It's always great to have Director Botticelli here with us, and he is doing a magnificent job. I want to commend him and Dave Wilkinson, who's here as well. You heard the mayor allude to earlier social impact bonds. I'm pleased to serve on the Ways and Means Committee and be a chief sponsor of that legislation that I do believe holds a number of creative ways for us to deal with this problem. Kudos to the previous speakers, the mayor and my dear friend and colleague Rosa DeLauro, and the Attorney General Daly, who I think outlined the data for you rather succinctly. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the unbelievable job that Governor Malloy is doing. Not surprising when it comes to administering and staying out in front of a problem and dealing with catastrophes of all sorts. There is no one who's done it better than Governor Dannel Malloy, and I compliment him. And this delegation has been very hard at work as well. As Rosa was talking about, we're pleased, as I'm sure Dick and Chris, if he were here, would share with you the $1.1 billion that the President has appropriated, but that will not be enough. It's not enough that's needed to help our members on the front lines currently. So we have collectively submitted a letter and both support legislation that's called the Shaheen-Courtney legislation that we are putting forward that will provide an emergency supplemental so that we're able to deal with this. More importantly, that the people on the front lines, our professionals, our governors, and our mayors of our communities will have the resources that they need. They can't wait another budget cycle for us to go through these debates. They need the money now. Joe Courtney is leading that effort. You heard Rosa also talk about a number of the items that she has within the budget as well. So we're focused on that. I would just like to leave by saying this. Last evening, we had a film screening at Goodwin College in East Hartford. It's an HBO special. It's called Heroin, Cape Cod. It is very graphic. It's very compelling. It's very disconcerting. And yet I believe in the importance of forums like this and the ability to hear from experts, and the fact that so many in the media are here. The important thing is that we have way too many people who are in denial. Way too many people who do not believe that this impacts every single community, every single family. And the people last night who were there talked about two things: the humanization of this problem, the humanization in terms of putting faces on this. One lady got up and spoke about how if your neighbor had cancer, a young kid had cancer, people would be sending bouquets and soup and bread baskets to the house. But if your child is addicted, if your child is an addict, it's like the taboo. It's like the plague has descended upon a neighborhood. The humanization of this and the fact that we need to rely on science to make sure that we come up with the best results. Again, I commend this governor and the General Assembly here in Connecticut for stepping forward. That's what we're going to be dedicated to down in Washington, to make sure that you get the resources. But at the end of the day, governments don't keep children off of drugs. Governments don't start early on in middle school making sure about awareness. Only people, parents, and friends and neighbors can do that. It's a big task. We cannot be in denial. I commend the governor. I commend the secretary for being here. Director, we're pleased that you're here in Hartford, the capital city of Connecticut, the home of constitutional democracy, where we are proud to defend one of his most ardent defenders, Richard Blumenthal.
Thank you. I know that applause is for constitutional democracy, not for me. And I'm going to dispense with the thanks. You've heard a lot of thanks. There's an old saying, my colleagues in politics will remember it, that the people you mention will not remember, and the people you fail to mention will never forget. So I want to thank all the public officials, my colleagues in the Congress who are here, but most importantly you. What I see here is Connecticut, all over Connecticut, all different walks of life, all different professions. I want to thank particularly the UConn pharmacy students for being here today. Thank you for being here, and thanks for the good work that you're going to do. I'm always reassured when I see folks in white coats in the audience. So there are a couple of ways that we need to demand more of the federal government. First of all, this $1.1 billion budget proposal is a proposal. It's money the president is seeking from the Congress. But the Speaker of the House has already said, well, we may not even have a budget. What we need really is the emergency supplemental that Joe Courtney is championing in the House. I am helping to lead the effort in the Senate. That would be money in hand. And we should all agree, and it should be bipartisan, that we need that money now. U.S. Attorney Daley described what we're seeing as a perfect storm, and we should regard the epidemic in opiate and heroin addiction as a public health hurricane. It is as much a disaster as any kind of physical disaster would be, any hurricane, tornado, flood, and it should be approached with the same sense of urgency and passion. There are some other things that we really need the federal government to do. First of all, maybe stop approving all these new opiates, the more powerful ones. Do we need more powerful painkillers? Should there be perhaps closer scrutiny about the approval by the FDA? And by the way, approval for children's use. Anybody sense something may be wrong with this picture of young children using powerful painkillers that we know are a gateway to addiction? And maybe there ought to be better insurance coverage for all of this treatment, all of the stuff that we know works because we can see it's working, and perhaps more access to Narcan at more affordable prices for our police, our emergency responders, and our fire service. Narcan, we know, saves lives. 129 people, U.S. Attorney Daley used that number, 129 people every day, today, die of overdoses. Narcan saves lives, brings people back from the brink of death, and yet the prices have skyrocketed and the amounts and availability have been reduced. Something's wrong with that picture too, and the federal government has a role to play. There are other areas where our military can be involved in interdicting and intercepting drugs, where law enforcement needs and deserves more resources, not only at the federal level, but at the state and local level. I want to thank all of the law enforcement folks who are here today. And where even our military is shortchanged. And I've heard the briefings about how our military often sees the drug runners at sea and lacks its own boats to intercept them. That means that we are at the end of that pipeline of drugs that could be stopped. And we should take more aggressive, stronger action to do so. One person who has dedicated his life to this work, whom I'm going to introduce, is Michael Botticelli. He's visited Connecticut before. He is the federal government's leader as the head of the office that has jurisdiction over this area. And he knows, as we do, that no one is immune to this problem. No community, no family. It is an equal opportunity life destroyer. Regardless of race, religion, wealth, drugs kill regardless of where you're from or how much money you have or what your race and religion is. And that is the sad truth and the reason why this work is so critically important and why I am proud to introduce to you Michael Botticelli, who heads the Office of Drug Control Policy.
Good afternoon, everybody. And Senator Blumenthal, thank you for that introduction. It's good to be back in Connecticut. I spent the bulk of my career in public health just up the road in Massachusetts, but also represented the New England region as part of our National Board of Directors dealing with substance use issues. I also want to thank the mayor for allowing us, playing host, and for his leadership on these issues, for being here today, and particularly to Governor Malloy, who you'll hear from in a minute, and the work that he's doing and some of the innovation that he's doing. I really want to thank my other colleagues, the U.S. Attorney, Congressman, Congresswoman, the leadership. You know, I couldn't help but think about, when I think about who we have here today, not just in terms of elected and administration representatives, but who we have in the audience, that this is the solution to our problem. That it really is all about how we come together in meaningful ways, work with each other, hear each other's voices, and work together at the federal, state, and local level, that we're going to continue to make progress. And I was really struck as I was listening to all the speakers talk very heartfelt words about how we need to do more. And Connecticut has been a leader, but we all know that we need to do more here in Connecticut. We need to do more across the country. And I will continue to work on these issues. So this is an incredibly important discussion that we're having today to really talk about the impact that opioids are having on our communities, what we can do to end it, what our promising practices, what we should be thinking about nationally. And to do that, you know, we have put together a really, I think, terrific panel of folks to represent multiple different dimensions around the heroin epidemic. And you'll hear from Governor Malloy in a minute, but we are going to hear from Taisha Jeffries, who's in recovery. We'll talk about her experience to do that. Gary Mendel, my good friend, who's a parent who's turned his grief into tremendous advocacy, as we've seen across the country. Dr. Mark Strauss, who's an addiction specialist who I've known, and Chief Mark Palmer from the Coventry Police Department. You know, these are all tremendously important sectors of the community. We need to make sure that we're hearing from them in terms of the work that we're doing and how we continue to make our communities safer. You know, one focus in particular, if you're upstairs for the press announcement that Governor Malloy made, we also want to hear about innovative solutions to encourage businesses and communities to invest in evidence-based practices to expand treatment. So one of these ideas that was just announced upstairs is the Connecticut Family Stability Pay for Success program. And this is a really exciting social innovation program that Governor Malloy announced earlier today that will help as many as 500 at-risk families overcome parental substance use and lead healthier and more stable lives. And the interesting thing about this is that people don't get paid unless they demonstrate good outcomes. And these are programs that have often been underfunded and need good outcomes, and it saves taxpayer money. So, you know, this is a win-win, and we're very pleased. We're very pleased to join that announcement today, because we think it's going to be really an exciting innovation that we hope to replicate nationally. It's a big big step for here in Connecticut, and these initiatives are exactly what we need to help families affected by substance use. So as you've heard, it's really no secret that prescription drug misuse and heroin abuse have had devastating consequences on both public health and public safety in this country and in Connecticut. We heard the staggering statistics, and we talk about these numbers, but it's hard because we know that each one of those deaths represent a lost life and a family that's been impacted by this. And we have done some things, but we know that we need to do more. As Director of National Drug Control Policy, I'm charged with President Obama's drug policy and working to find solutions to end this crisis. I'm proud to say that the work that's being done here in Connecticut is a great example of both the local commitment and the effectiveness and partnership between federal, state, local, private sector leaders, and how effectively our public health and public safety officials can work together. Because Washington is a wimp and my plane didn't take off on time, I didn't get a chance to visit the New Haven Correctional Center. Some of my staff went today, where they saw a medication-assisted treatment program that they have in place, which allows individuals who become incarcerated to continue their treatment. It's an important program that is helping people recover from their substance use disorders, and it's reducing recidivism on our criminal justice system. And the Commissioner for Correction was just here. I don't know if he's still here, but I want to thank him very much for his leadership. It's a program that we think is worth replicating around the country, and we really applaud his leadership on that. We're also working with the New England High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, funded by our office, which is a coordinated effort to disrupt drug trafficking networks in the state. We know the availability of cheap, very pure heroin, and of late, the dramatic increase in fentanyl has led to a huge increase in overdose deaths, and we have to work together with our law enforcement to diminish the supply in our community. While we know we can't arrest our way out of the problem, we have to work hand in hand with public safety to both reduce demand and reduce supply. So I want to stress that it's going to take everyone here working together to stop this crisis. President Obama has made it clear that addressing this opioid epidemic is a priority for his administration, and that's reflected in the work done throughout his presidency and in the new budget he released Tuesday, which includes $1.1 billion in new funding for treatment to help people with substance use disorders access treatment, complete treatment, and sustain long-term recovery. We still have a very long way to go, and that's why it's so important for all of us to be here today. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, and a man who needs no introduction. Governor Malloy is a strong partner in ending the opioid epidemic in Connecticut. We could not do it without his leadership and without state actions. He has signed many bills to strengthen treatment options and expand access to naloxone, the life-saving opioid overdose reversal drug, and is leading an effort to make sure first responders are trained and equipped to deliver naloxone. He's also an advocate for criminal justice reform, which is hand in hand with our drug policy efforts related to substance use, and he is for supported treatment, early intervention efforts, and including the state's prescription drug monitoring program. As I said earlier, Connecticut is a model state in many of these areas, and a lot has to do with the governor's work and dedication on this issue. So let's please welcome Governor Malloy.
Thank you, Director. Thank you. Director, thank you very much, and I'll try to make this quick, but I do have a couple of things to say, and I do have to leave, otherwise I'd sit on the bench with the Director, but because we're a little behind schedule, I have to skedaddle out of here. But a couple of things I want to say. Everybody in this room knows so much more about this epidemic than anyone else in the state, or at least the general population of the state. But we should never lose the opportunity to warn adults, parents, as well as children and young people of what this is all about. Opioid addiction, opioid use. Actually, one thing I want to make. Number one point. We have people dying from opioid on their first usage. And it happens on birthdays, and it happens on special occasions because it's seen as a cheap way to celebrate. The U.S. Attorney gave you how cheap it can be. $3.50, $10 will get you a dose. And it's become a popular way to change the environment. That is so different than everybody in this room who's 40 or 50 or 60. And I celebrated my 60th birthday. I remember when heroin was particularly expensive. In fact, if you were a junkie, you had to be committing crimes on an ongoing basis in order to support a very expensive habit. That's no longer the case. And that in and of itself is part of the problem. Secondarily, the purity of what's available in the United States right now. When I was growing up, 15, 20, 25% pure heroin would have been the benchmark. It was cut with all kinds of things, mostly quinine, but lots of other things as well. We're talking in the state of Connecticut, the U.S. Attorney and I were just discussing this, purity up to 73%. That's the birthday celebration death. That's the very short-term period of usage that someone's dying from, because it is so pure. It overwhelms the system. And that's what we're seeing play itself out in the advancement in the numbers of deaths in the United States, as the reference 129 a day. Actually, I've looked at some of my notes from our discussions in Connecticut leading to passage of legislation in 11, 12, 14, 15, and now another package that I've sent to the legislature in 16. I missed 1 year. We've been talking about this issue in Connecticut. Now people are actually focusing on it, and I think that's what's really empowering, is the media itself is getting into it. I wish they would report every death. I wish it was a front page story every day so that we could warn more people and parents of what this threat is. But we have been active at this issue. There are many interrelated issues. Failure in school, failure at home, other problems. The high school to prison pipeline that's been so well established in the United States. Our inability to forgive and have people get that second or third or fourth chance that they need to turn their lives around. All of that's interrelated as well. But we can do something about it. And you're going to hear some stories about that. You should appreciate that we're going to continue to work on that. One of the things that's in our legislation this year is to make sure that insurance companies are reimbursing or paying for at the counter Narcan to the people who ask for it. It shouldn't be pre-approved. If I'm a parent or if I'm a junkie and I go and say, hey, I need Narcan. The idea that we're going to then get on the phone with an insurance company to get some pre-approval and that might take a week or 2 weeks doesn't make any sense. We are going to do these kinds of things in Connecticut. We're going to save people's lives, but I'm so very happy that this effort is being joined by so many people. The other thing we want to do is make sure every first responder, if you're the first responder for health emergencies in any municipality and any jurisdiction in the state of Connecticut, you need to be trained on the use of Narcan. It's not just a medical issue. It's anyone who's first there. And if we can get that done in this year's legislation, we'll be that much further along as well. But I think we're missing the big thing. And that is that our young people and our parents don't understand the problem that they're up against. The purity and how cheap it is. We have too many people stuck in the past thinking of heroin use the way it used to be thought of. It isn't like that anymore. In fact, final point. I was a prosecutor in Brooklyn, New York, 1980 through February 1984. This is a lot like what happened when cocaine became cheap. It's a lot like what happened in the United States when cocaine became particularly cheap. It overwhelmed the system. That's what's happening now. And the first real chapter of winning this war is to have everyone in our society recognize what the problem is. You did, but I knew this was being taped, and I was speaking to another audience. Thank you very much. Director, thank you.
Thanks again. Sorry. It's okay. Let's talk soon. Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for your help. Thanks. Sure.
As they come up. So Gary Mendel, who is an advocate for championing parents, has taken his strategy there on the national stage. Mark Krause, who's a physician specialist in addiction, has been doing this work for a very long time. Taisha Jeffrey, do you want to sit here? And then I'll switch with you. She's going to talk about her own story. And Pete Martell, who I think brings a unique perspective in terms of law. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just open and start. Just say 3 or 4 comments from their perspective, how they see the impact of the epidemic and things that we can be doing more work about. So, Taisha, would you like to, why don't you start us off?
I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Well, I'm here because I was addicted to Percocets and Oxycontin, and I completed a treatment program for methadone. So my whole thing is that I just think the methadone program was excellent. I mean, it really saved me because I was just, it was already bad. I was on the pills, but I just found myself going deeper and deeper into the addiction. And although I was able to maintain work and my apartment and everything like that, I don't know where I would have been if I didn't get the treatment at the program and the groups and the counseling and just the one-on-one, the structure of having some place to go and to look forward to weaning myself off of the methadone. So I just think that the programs are like the #1 thing that should be a focus, because if you use it as a tool to get recovered, then it really works. And it's still working for me to this day.
To my far left is Gary Mendel, who, as I said, I've known for a long time, and can't think of a more committed advocate for this work. And Gary represents, I think, one of many thousands of parents who've been affected by this, who in an extraordinary way have taken their grief and turned it into amazing advocacy, as only, I think, a parent affected by this disease can do. So,
Thank you.
Gary, do you want to share a little
Sure.
bit about your story and kind of the work, things that you're doing?
Sure. My name is Gary Mendel. I grew up here in Connecticut, raised my family here in Connecticut, and like many in Connecticut, unfortunately, was tragically touched by this disease when my older son Brian passed away in October 2011. And after his death, struggling to make sense of what had happened, I was really haunted knowing that what had happened to us is happening to so many families around this country. And that for every major disease in this country, there was one well-funded national organization funding private research, advocating for changes in public policies, getting the research that's proven to work implemented in our communities, and providing information and support and hope for so many families. And thinking of those organizations, American Cancer, American Heart, Autism Speaks, and the rest, there was no such organization for addiction. And with that, I decided to leave my career in business and start that. But starting is only one piece. And since then, there's almost 100,000 that have joined us around the country in some way, shape, or form. And we've been working really hard in the last couple of years. Even though our vision is to do those things that I mentioned those organizations do, to start out, we can't do everything. So we have focused on common sense legislative initiatives to reduce the number of our loved ones who die from an overdose. And there's really, from our perspective, 4 big things that we're focused on. One is requiring doctors to check someone's prescribing history before they consider prescribing an opiate. Because one thing that really hasn't been touched upon here is what's driving all of this. It's a 4 times increase in the number of prescription pills that are being prescribed on an annual basis compared to where it was 15 years ago. So the CDC guidelines that will give guidelines to doctors all across the country voluntarily are going to be out in the next several months at some point. And then we're going to work really hard to get doctors educated on those guidelines. The other things we've been doing around states is working on this legislation to require doctors to check someone's prescribing history before they prescribe something. Because so often, I just heard a statistic yesterday that literally half the veterans who overdosed last year overdosed because they had an opiate and a benzodiazepine in their blood system. And if doctors would check the prescribing history of a person before they prescribe, they would have seen there was a benzodiazepine currently being prescribed to that person that could have been avoided in many circumstances. And the other thing that it's been talked about is medication-assisted treatment. American Society of Addiction Medicine came out with those guidelines last October, and we're going to work really hard to get those implemented. And lastly, naloxone, Narcan. That should be as common as aspirin everywhere. So that's what we're doing around the country in about half a dozen states right now, and look forward to working with many of you here.
Thank you, Gary. Another gentleman who I've known for quite a while, Dr. Mark Kraus, who has a long history not only as a practitioner but as a national leader in terms of advancing addiction medicine in the United States, in looking at making sure that we have addiction medicine as part of overall health care. We had the chance to talk earlier today. So Dr. Kraus, maybe from your perspective, you could talk about how this epidemic, as you've seen it, kind of requires an enhanced response from the medical community and what you see as kind of priorities for this work.
Sure. I want to thank you all for being here, excuse me, and applaud yourselves. I also want to say that a lot of friends are out there. We all have a responsibility to do something about this and not just leave it here. If you think about this, in November 2011, the Center for Disease Control declared this a public health care crisis. If this was a viral crisis like Ebola, can you imagine what the outcry would have been with the numbers that we have that are so staggering? 25 million Americans suffer from chronic addiction. In 2012, 2.5 million people abused opiates, prescription meds, and heroin. And in 2013, that number jumped to 4.8 million people, 100% increase. Now we're seeing people younger become more involved. They start out with mom and dad's prescription pills in their medicine cabinet. They think they're safe because mom and dad got it from a physician. They try it out. They like the way they feel. They exploit that in their mom's and dad's cabinet. Then they look for other relatives and they keep doing it. All of a sudden, bang, they can't be without it. They've developed tolerance. They need the drug to feel good, or else they don't get the drug, they feel sick like the worst flu. And what happens? At $1 a milligram on the street, they can't afford to stay in the game. So what do? They turn to the cheaper drug, which is heroin. And heroin is all sorts of things. We don't do qualitative and quantitative analyses on heroin. So we don't know how pure or how weak it is. But these kids get into it and finally start using lots and lots of bags. All of a sudden, one day, they get a bag that's much stronger than they've ever had, but they have no knowledge of that. They take it and they overdose. And that's the story that goes out there. And then they grow up and they wind up having to become adults. But when they're growing up, in our state, we don't have enough treatment available for young people. The millennial people really have a trouble finding caretakers. So what else is the problem? It's physicians like myself and all healthcare providers. We weren't educated on how to deal with this, how to diagnose this. Even though there's been evidence-based studies shown about screening and brief interventions, doctors are supposed to ask you about this in the office, they don't. And so it goes unnoticed, undiagnosed. And we now have medication-assisted treatment that Gary pointed out to you that actually works. People can actually get care. Addiction is a chronic disorder. It affects the neurophysiochemistry of the brain, makes those circuits function abnormally, and what we have is medication to make that better. So we do have the same kind of things in another situation, diabetes, hypertension, we always talk about that. We have medical-assisted treatment for those things. We don't say you have to be off that tomorrow because it's a chronic disease, and if you go off your insulin, you might get real sick. So what do? You have to take it for life. We don't knock down that person. We support that person. We have behavioral things that we can use in addiction, but we have the same thing with chronic diseases like heart disease. You got to watch your diet. You got to exercise. You have to do things that are going to work. So on one hand, we have physicians who need the education, and two, we have public that have to understand what's going on. And the other thing is that the public also has a really responsibility to talk to their kids to not just read about it in the newspaper. You know, we hear about the celebrities, the Whitney Houstons and the Philip Hoffman. We hear about those. But then again, we don't hear anything about the unknowns, the overdose unknowns. Look what happened in New London County, in our own state, just a few weeks ago. We lost a whole lot of kids. You read it, you heard it, and next. That's us today. But we have to take responsibility to talk to our kids. We have physicians who have to learn. We have public that has to learn. We have payers that have to understand, like every other chronic disorder, they're responsible to help us. In other words, they tell the doctors, you can't use this medication, you have to use that medication. You can only get the prescription filled for this long, not for that long. They make us go through the hoops called Fire Ross. We need help. And that's not just the physician and the healthcare community. We need help as a group. We all have to jump on board and go forward together. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Kraft. Good. Chief Palmer, I wonder if you could talk about kind of your experience with this epidemic and how the police have responded.
Sure. I'll try to be brief. Our U.S. Attorney kind of summed it up when she said that this is a problem in every corner of the state of Connecticut and beyond. I've been a police officer for a long time, 37 years. I started out in the city of Norwalk, which is a fairly large city, and now I'm in the town of Coventry, which is a mostly rural community. The problem exists regardless of where you go in the state of Connecticut. I am both pleased and really kind of taken aback that when I was a young patrol officer, heroin abuse was something that was in the shadows. People didn't talk about it. People, used it in abandoned buildings and in alleyways and those types of things. And the people that were addicted to those types of narcotics really were under the radar. And most people really didn't care about them. Most communities didn't want to admit that there was a problem in their community. Most elected leaders didn't want to talk about it. And I'm really impressed that our state is kind of on the forefront in bringing this to light and having these discussions with people in the room, such as it's here today. And I'm pleased that our elected officials and our appointed leaders are bringing resources to bear on this issue. In our community, about a year ago, we started carrying naloxone because the state police started carrying it, and not many municipal police departments were carrying it. And I said, if the state police can do it, why not? We had a few bumps in the road. I reached out to the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and they kind of got us over those humps. And we actually had a local physician in our town who subscribes naloxone or Suboxone and other drugs to people that are addicted in our community. He wrote us a prescription, and every one of our patrol cars carries Narcan hooked to our AEDs. Each one of our patrol cars has an external defibrillator device, which is a life-saving measure that we can use on folks who are in distress or their heart is stopped, and that's where our Narcan is, right next to that. We've actually had a few deployments where we've saved people with Narcan. We're not the first medical responder, however. We have a voluntary ambulance service. At the time, they were not carrying naloxone, so we went ahead and did it ourselves with a prescription from a local physician. Our ambulance service, since that time, has begun carrying Narcan, but our officers still carry it because many times we're on the scene before the ambulance arrives. And we've had 2 instances where officers just on routine patrol came across a vehicle late at night that, maybe they thought it was some kids parking or just an abandoned car or whatever, and they found out the occupant had injected narcotics, and before we started carrying Narcan, one of those individuals died. So that was really one of the things that made us begin to carry the Narcan. We have a prescription drug drop box that in 2015, in our small community, relatively small community, we've recovered over 300 pounds of prescription medications in that drop box that prevents those drugs from being diverted into the illicit narcotic stream or in waterways and landfills and those types of things. So again, to sum up, I'm really happy that this discussion is taking place. I'm happy that our elected officials have enacted laws to allow us to do things like carry Narcan and have drug drop boxes and really look at it as a public health issue.
Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate the leadership. So, Commissioner, it's good to see you. Thank you for filling in for the governor here. So the state has taken some pretty strong action here in this issue, but what do you see as kind of important next steps? What, despite all the work, we know that there's more work to do. What do you see as kind of key things that the state or we as a federal government need to do to respond to this epidemic?
Yeah, a couple things. So I think one area that is an important next step is really continuing to increase the availability of Narcan really statewide, so that I understand now many pharmacies are beginning to make it available. So we really want to increase the availability of it statewide. Another thing is having more people sort of inducted and more people take part in medication-assisted treatment. MAT really has been identified as a best practice in this area, and so really looking to do more and certainly could do more around expanding both methadone as well as bupe and other forms of medication-assisted treatment. And then certainly the creative collaborations. This truly is an all-hands-on-deck issue, and so continued collaborations with state police. We've done a lot of advertising around the prescription drop boxes, and thank you for that work. That's been really critical, and our regional action councils have been advertising the availability of those drop boxes. So those are just some areas, and then certainly increasing additional education around just the dangers of prescription drugs and heroin usage. So more education and training programs as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's really good. Taisha, I want to come back to you. Both Dr. Kraus and the Commissioner talked about the need that in some respects we do know what works around treatment, and we do know that medications, when combined with other supports, are highly effective. And we talked about the need for more physicians increasing. You talked very candidly about being on methadone, which, as someone also in recovery, you don't see very often. And I want to ask you, because there's still a lot of stigma, even in the recovery community, about being on medications. And I wonder, there was actually an interesting piece in the New York Times today, if you didn't see it, about medication-assisted treatment. But one, I have two parts. So one, did you feel or do you feel some of that stigma in the recovery community about being on methadone? And kind of second is, how do you think we should go about changing that?
A lot of my family members are like, oh, you're still on that program, you're still going there. And a lot of the clients there too, they always had like negative things to say about it. But I mean, I think it just worked well for me because, I weaned off and, I forgot what the question was.
So how do we go about changing those kinds of attitudes about medications and about methadone?
I mean, I don't know, it just worked for me. I mean, I went and I took it as I was prescribed, and I really don't know, I'm sorry.
If I could chime in. I think just your sharing the fact that it's worked for you is huge for folks because it gives people hope. And that alone helps, I think, dispel some of the stigma and discrimination around the value of MAT. So I applaud you for sharing your experiences and other people who shared their stories of recovery as well. That's huge because it lets people see that I don't have to be stuck here, that there is hope on the other side of this. And so I think that that's significant, and thank you.
I'm sorry, guys.
This goes to the essence, and thank you for sharing, because I know it's tough. This goes to the essence as a methadone provider. We don't knock people who take insulin because we've accepted insulin for treatment for diabetes. Methadone is a medicine that is acceptable in the medical community as a medically approved treatment. It's been evidence-based, it's been studied, and it works well. That's the point. We have to educate ourselves and spread the word from ourselves in any form that we come to that this comes up. Because the treatment of someone who has opiate dependence with methadone is life-saving. And I don't think the family member would want to see that person relapse and die. And I think we need to look at it like that. An untreated overdose is basically somebody who should have gotten care. So someone who dies doesn't have to die. We do have treatment. It just blows my mind to think, here we are, 2016, soon to be 17, the way the flight is going, and we're still in this debate, discussion, when the numbers are so significant, when it's affecting, as Gary said, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from in the social strata, it's a non-prejudicial disease, period. And we need to start to understand that. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to put into the media, social media, get it to kids that they don't have to go this route. And that's public education that starts at home, parents speaking to their children. So thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, I mean, like, people thought that, you know, I was using it to still get high and things like that, but the withdrawal effects is just terrible, and you can't function. So when I would go to the program and get the methadone, you know, it just took the edge off, and I wasn't even thinking about using the opiates because I was comfortable enough to work and maintain my day. And then, you know, I was good after that. So the addiction wasn't like, you know, calling me like, oh, I need it. Because if I didn't have anything in my system, then, you know, that was the only thing that I was just focused on, is getting the pills and getting, you know, my filling going and everything. So that the methadone was just like, I needed it, and, you know, it got me through the days, and, you know, I was good after that.
Thank you. Really appreciate you sharing that. Gary, I want to go back to a point that you made. You know, one of the important aspects of dealing with addiction in this epidemic has been advocacy. Right. And the need for particularly state advocacy and particularly some of the legislation that we've seen here in Connecticut. Right. So I wonder if you'd kind of share your kind of experience about what you think goes into successful advocacy, because there's a real art and skill to it, and you've obviously been able to really affect change at the state level. So I wonder if you'd talk about that for a little bit.
Sure. I think I have my mic, so I'm good.
Okay.
I'm still learning. This is our third year doing it. But what we have found successful is simplifying the message and boiling down the message to the key points that matter. And I would say the second thing is bringing in personal stories, as we just heard, humanizing the issue. So when you humanize the issue and you can simplify the messaging, we've been really good on creating fact sheets for legislators, why this is important. You know, for example, California right now, we're working hard in California to get legislation passed that was similar to what was passed in Connecticut last year. What's the legislation? It is suggesting that doctors, the legislation is to require doctors check someone's prescribing history before they make a prescription, before they even think about writing a prescription. Secondly, that the type of drugs they have to check before, they have to check the database before they write, includes Schedule 4. The current proposal is only Schedules 2 and 3, which to all of us sounds like a bunch of schedules. But when you simplify on a fact sheet on 5 bullet points, if you just do Schedules 2 and 3, it doesn't include benzos. If someone is taking a benzodiazepine and they're taking an opiate, their chance of overdose is 4 times. Next bullet, 50% of the veterans who lost their life last year for an overdose was in their bloodstream was a benzo and an opiate. You've got to include Schedule 4. Next bullet, boom, 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 boom. It's simple marketing, simplifying, I think, is what we've been successful at. And then also, as I mentioned, bringing in the human element. This is you know, one thing we talked about a second ago was the numbers. To me, the most important number is 1. It's 1. I don't care if it's 10,000. If it's 1 life that could be lost and simply saved, that's what's most important. And here we have a wonderful life that's been saved. So I'm proud to be here with you.
Dr. Krause, I'm going to start with you in this question and then just ask others. You know, one of the things that we've talked about as part of the solution has been to educate physicians and prescribers, not just around responsible prescribing, but about issues around pain, around issues around substance use in general. So can you talk from your experience? You've been a longtime advocate of what you see are kind of key components, not just with physicians, but with folks who treat pain, with people who treat substance use issues. What do you see as kind of key principles as we think about education in this arena?
Yeah, sure. I think
you're up.
So you can't talk about addiction these days and not talking about pain, especially in the world that we're here about opiate dependence. So the public's expectation about pain when they have it, no matter what kind of pain, and there are different kinds of pain, is that they're going to go and they're going to get treatment. They're going to get a medicine. They're going to get a prescription when they leave that's going to eradicate the pain. Unfortunately, there is no medication that eradicates all the pain. Pain management is about making someone functional. And you don't have to start out with pills. You can start out with an ice pack and a hot pack and massage and physical therapy and a TENS unit, electrical stimulation, and aspirin and acetaminophen, and then you can go up the ladder. So we don't have to start with morphine. We can start down with an ice pack. So expectations that patients have is really important. The second thing is that they say that the fifth pathway is what started this on the road as physicians. Long ago, not that long ago, we had been audited, or the JCAHO came into being, that we needed to address pain. Questionnaires were filled out with people in the hospitals, and they were saying they weren't taken care of properly. And then onward and forward, the field said that we have to evaluate pain. And then when we started evaluating pain, what are you doing to treat pain? And before you know it, we just opened up this new silo market, and we were treating pain with major drugs and many more than are needed. How many of you have walked into a healthcare professional and walked out with a prescription for 150 Vicodins that you'll never use in any day, any month, or any year? We all have gone through that. And do you need that? No. Do we reject that? No. And we do that with dentists and veterinarians and APRNs and PAs, all of us in the healthcare professional. Why? Because just like we don't have enough education about addiction, we are also woefully lacking education about pain management. And hopefully all this is going to change. Hopefully this is going to be the end of it all, because we've learned lessons. Now we have to unlearn, physicians have to unlearn bad habits by giving out medications, perhaps that they need to learn to start from the bottom of the treatment for pain rather than jumping in on top and trying to work down, because it never works. Once you go to the upper echelon morphine, you're not going to get down to the ice pack.
Thank you. One of the things that I've known about Connecticut for a long time was the vibrancy of a recovery movement here, and in many respects kind of pioneered the concept of recovery community organizations through a lot of great work from people who are in this room. And so the question is, I want to ask the panelists, maybe I'll start with the commissioner and other folks who want to chime in. What do you see as the role of the recovery community? How can what can the recovery community do to play its role as it relates to this epidemic?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I mean, we've been really engaging in discussions with many of our advocates around just what creative strategies can we put in place. And one thing we've been talking about is we know that there's a window from when people are experiencing a reversal. In the ERs, there's potentially an opportunity for the recovery community to partner with us and begin to engage folks at that point. To begin to talk with people about the value of different forms of treatment, about MAT, about recovery supports, about meditation or yoga, if that's something that they see that might be useful for them. So I think there's a window there where people with lived experience can begin to engage people who have experienced reversals or who are at any point within their addiction experience. So that's one thing that we're beginning to explore right now.
Good. Taisha, do you have any thoughts in terms of the, other than appearing in front of a whole bunch of people you don't know and talking about your story, do you see kind of other roles for the recovery community in this?
I'm sorry, I'm just drawing a blank
No,
right now.
that's okay. I have a thought. One of the things, someone mentioned the HBO documentary Heroin on Cape Cod. And, I don't know if anyone saw it, but it was a pretty bleak portrayal of addiction. And one of the things that many of us in the recovery community felt like was missing was that voice of someone in recovery. And, part of what we can do is kind of create recovery, not only on an individual basis, but on a community basis, that people need to see hope on the other side of addiction. And that's a big obstacle, stigma. They need to see hope. And so I've always felt, and I'll speak for myself as someone in recovery, that we've had a responsibility to put that human face on this and to show people that there is hope, that you can get better. Because without that, it feels pretty bleak. The other thing that I'll say too, and I think there's a lot of good work happening here, is we know access to treatment is important, but we want to get people to long-term recovery. And that requires a whole bunch of things: recovery coaching, recovery community support organizations, meaningful employment, meaningful housing. So we know that one of the things that we have to do is to kind of move beyond just the treatment piece of this to really support a whole continuum of care. So thank you for asking that question. Chief, I want to ask you a question just to pivot back. One of the things that we've heard here in Connecticut, and quite honestly in other parts of the country, has been the dramatic increase in fentanyl.
Yes.
And just wonder if you could talk about what your experience has been, what your officers are seeing, and
Sure.
Because that's a particularly dangerous issue that we have now.
Yeah, our Connecticut Intelligence Center that gathers data from law enforcement across the state does a real good job at keeping track of when municipal departments or the state police come across fentanyl. They try to do that to identify where the drugs are originating from and to have a strategy and try to eradicate those. I'd like to say that in Connecticut, I understand that treatment and recovery are very important, but I also think enforcement for people that sell drugs, particularly in large quantities, is very important. Our DEA, our Connecticut State Police Drug Enforcement Unit, the local task forces and local departments, they work really hard. It's very dangerous work, and it takes a long time to build cases against people that are selling large quantity of drugs. So I'd like to kind of compliment the law enforcement community in the state for the hard work that they do. And they are targeting people that are selling large quantity of drugs and trying to track down where fentanyl is coming from and those types of things. They do that by certain identifying marks that are on heroin, what areas it's being sold, and try to track those things down. We're seeing it at a large percentage of our heroin recoveries. We're seeing it in the eastern portion of the state. Of course, it's all across the state, but particularly in the eastern section of the state. And we all know what happens when you mix fentanyl with heroin. And a lot of our overdoses are fentanyl-related overdoses.
Good. Thank you very much. One of the things that I think that you represent has been the extraordinary partnership that we've seen with public health and public safety. That we know that we each have a share of the responsibility, and that we need to work together, not to arrest and incarcerate more people, but as to your point, kind of how do we take down the real high-end dealers here? How do we ensure that we're keeping our community safe, that we're getting fentanyl off the streets, and that we're using that as opportunities to divert people into care? So I really, appreciate the way that law enforcement has stepped to the table in terms of understanding that, we can't arrest our way out of the problem, that we know we need to give people with addiction help. So really thank you for kind of all of the work that you've been doing. I always like to give our panelists an opportunity to take advantage of the fact that you have federal officials here. And just to ask a question, so we talked about the need for more resources, and we certainly know, and particularly around access to treatment, that becomes important. But I also want to hear your thoughts about the one or two things that we could be doing either more of or should be doing to deal and to help folks at the state and local level in this epidemic.
Sure.
So Gary, I'll start with you.
I want to open first by thanking you, because again, we've known each other for a few years, and as I've gotten to this field, Director Botticelli has just done a fantastic job, everything he's doing. So I want to compliment you before I even start. The way I look at the issue from my perspective, I divide it between the 2.5 million people who are addicted to opiates and the 300 million that exist today that are not, and their children and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren have yet to be born. So how do we prevent them from becoming addicted? And how do we take care of these people who are already addicted? One idea for each. On this side, it's prescriber education. There's a couple numbers here that stand out that are indisputable. The amount of pills, prescription pills that have been prescribed in this country annually have gone up 4 times in the last 15 years, and the amount of deaths from opiates have gone up 5 times. So there's no question that if we can prescribe prescription opiates in balance with pain, we are going to save a lot of lives of people who have yet to be born or our kids who are still growing up. And the way to do that is mandated prescriber education. The DEA should require, without any exception, any prescriber who has the license to prescribe an opiate has to take 1 course every 2 years to get their DEA registration on a course that's created by the CDC, not created by pharmaceutical money, but created by CDC taxpayer money on the proper prescribing of pain medication. That is the number one idea that I would ask the federal government to push harder on, and I know that you are, but I'm calling on the DEA to do this. That's number one. On the treatments, on those who are already addicted, the American Society of Addiction Medicine came out with guidelines last October, and the federal government should require, I believe, any treatment program in this country or any doctor in this country who is treating anyone with an opiate use disorder to take a course in what ASAM has just spent years developing based on science. They take the course, they learn the information, then it's voluntary how you use it, but at least they learn the knowledge. So it really comes down to prescriber education for both prevention and treatment.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Dr. Krause?
Like I said, excuse me, like I said.
You get one.
I got one. I'll take it and get the same one. I think that it should be really a public-private partnership. I think that the public, the treatment community, the payers, the need to come together and strategize a real strategy to make it work, finally. And I think the federal government has the capabilities of actually making that happen. We need to take the barriers off getting to treatment, take the barriers off the length of treatment. We need to just basically customize it to the patient that we're taking care of, not unlike we do for every other disease. And I think if we could do that, and given what you said, I mean, this is a fact that I am blown away with, that I think is that the U.S. consumes most of the world's supply of opiates, prescription pain meds. By 2010, there was enough opiates, prescription pain meds, were prescribed to medicate every American adult around the clock for a month. You think we got a problem? So I'm hoping that we can actually do something like that to make it happen.
Great. Good. Aisha, do you have some thoughts and recommendations about kind of what we could be doing more of, what could we do better?
Just for me, when I started using the pills, I didn't really have any education on them, like the withdrawal effects. I mean, I know that there was some withdrawal, but I didn't know how, deadly it gets, how crazy it gets with it. So maybe just more education in schools, because I don't think my kids, I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, they don't learn anything in school about prescription drugs and abuse or anything like that. So I think that would be good.
Good. So more school-based education.
Yeah.
Do you think is important to do?
Yes, because if I had more knowledge, then I think I would have made a better choice, but I had none.
Huh. Interesting. Good. Chief?
I think on behalf of law enforcement, I'd like to see an easy way for us to get people into treatment. Generally, we just had a case the other day. I was reading the case report. We had an individual that was addicted to heroin. That individual's mother and sister were trying to stop her from going out of the house because her intent was to go out and buy heroin. Our officers responded because a disturbance was reported, and basically we didn't have a place to bring her other than the emergency room of the hospital. We get very little follow-up or feedback from the emergency room once that happens. I'd like to see us be able to have resources that we can get somebody into treatment if they choose to do so immediately. I've read about some programs in different parts of the country where they have volunteers that'll come in and kind of walk that person, hold their hand and walk them through the system, through the insurance problems and all those other issues that go along with getting into treatment. So I'd like to see the state of Connecticut work on that. We would, law enforcement would have those resources.
Good, good. I think you've articulated something that I hear quite a bit, which is a good thing. I think law enforcement wanting closer collaborations with our treatment providers, and I think that's very good. And actually, I talked about that with the commissioner at lunch today about, one of the simple things I've advocated for is our treatment providers have a date night with local law enforcement just to get to know one another, because it's really important to have that collaborative relationship so you can pick up the phone and do that. But again, I think going beyond that and just looking at kind of accelerated referrals, I think it's great. I think it's an area that's been expanding, so I really appreciate that. Commissioner?
Yeah, a couple things. I think, more resources to fund these creative, cross-disciplinary collaborations. As we've talked about, this is truly an all-hands-on-deck crisis, and so more work to be able to fund creative collaborations across different community, federal, state levels is one thing. Another thing, I think more resources to fund long-term recovery programs. The housing, the education, peer support, peer coaching. I think that's an area that can absolutely help to promote long-term recovery. And then certainly it being able to, I think grants to states to be able to support enhanced or expanded medication-assisted treatment programs as well. I think those three areas alone, I think, would be pretty significant.
Great, good, thank you, I appreciate it. Gary, I'm going to go back to you as a parent. One of the things, and I'm sure you've heard this with many, many parents who've dealt with this, that many parents don't suspect that their child has a problem until. Right. And I've heard this throughout the course of the 20-some-odd years I've been doing this work. How, from your experience as a parent, if you look back now, what would be helpful for us collectively to do to help kind of educate parents that of the warning signs or suspecting that this might be an issue? I don't know if that was an issue for you, but what recommendation do you have for either other parents or how we can do a better job at educating people?
Several ways. There's a program that is recommended, by SAMHSA and the federal government, in your office, I'm sure, life skills. So life skills, if I were a parent today, I'd want that program in my middle school combined with a program called Strengthening Families, because when you put the two together, the evidence shows that the likelihood of your child getting to high school and using drugs is substantially reduced. So I would want that in my community. Second thing is, which part comes out of those two programs of what they teach you, and we've heard a lot of it today, this is a change in brain chemistry. This is not a bad kid or bad parenting. And for parents to understand that. So if a child is feeling depressed, they know it's okay to talk to their parent. Anxiety, or possibly feeling good about drugs, and maybe it's becoming a little bit of a problem not using at that young age. So I think it comes down to changing the way that we, in addition to the specifics of life skills and strengthening families in the middle school, which are a parenting program and an educational program at the school, it's changing the way that we talk about addiction, the way we think about it, the way we describe it. As mentioned earlier, we don't tell a diabetic who's just had a setback they have to go to jail. We don't tell an epileptic that the medicine that can save their lives can't be carried in an ambulance. But we do those with addiction. And if we can change the way that we think about it, we talk about it, it will just make it feel like it's a health issue, and that's okay.
Thank you, and I think that's a fitting end to a great panel and a great discussion that we've had here. I want to thank all of our panelists today for your willingness not just to be here, but the work that you do on a daily basis, because that's really what matters, and your willingness to kind of share yourself and your story as part of the work. And I'd like to thank all of the other federal and state colleagues who were here today. I think it was really incredibly important and also incredibly symbolic about kind of, Commissioner, that this is an all-hand-on-deck issue and that we each have a role to play, that whether it's kind of big system change or, you know, as easy as taking the medicine out of your medicine cabinet, that we each have a role to play in ending this epidemic. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I wanted to thank all of you for your leadership and your passion in doing this work. I will tell you that you have a federal partner at ONDCP. We learn a lot from you. I like to think that we listen as much as we talk. Maybe not, but it's important for us to know kind of what we're doing and whether it's working and where we need to continue to focus our efforts. I really want to thank you all for being here today and for being part of this work. Thanks, everybody.